The black sedan pulled up to the front of Romano's, one of the most expensive restaurants in downtown Chicago. The valet rushed forward as David Chen stepped out, adjusting his $1,000 suit jacket. He was the CEO of Tech Global Industries, a company worth over $2 billion. Tonight was crucial. He had a meeting with investors from Japan who could make or break his biggest deal yet. David looked at his Rolex. 7:30 sharp. Perfect timing. He always prided himself on being punctual, unlike the people who worked for him. In his mind, successful people were always on time. Everyone else just made excuses. Romano's was the kind of place where deals got made. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and soft piano music played in the background. The walls were covered with expensive art, and every table had fresh flowers. This was where the powerful people of the city came to eat and make million-dollar decisions. The hostess, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, greeted him with a bright smile. "Good evening, Mr. Chen. Your table is ready." She led him through the dining room, past tables filled with well-dressed business people talking in hushed tones about stocks, mergers, and international trade. David's table was in the best spot in the restaurant, near the window with a view of the city lights. He sat down and immediately started checking his phone for emails. 3 of his business partners would be joining him soon, followed by the Japanese investors at 8 o'clock. As he scrolled through his messages, he noticed the waitress approaching his table. She was a young black woman, probably in her mid-20s, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore the standard restaurant uniform, a white button-down shirt and black pants, but something about the way she carried herself caught his attention. Not in a good way. David had very specific ideas about people. In his world, there were winners and losers. There were people who mattered, and people who served those who mattered. He looked at this waitress and immediately put her in the second category. "Good evening, sir," she said politely, setting down a glass of water. "My name is Trinity, and I'll be taking care of your table tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" David barely looked up from his phone. "Whatever. Just bring me your most expensive scotch, and make sure the ice is fresh. Last time I was here, the ice tasted like it came from a dirty freezer." Trinity nodded professionally. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure everything is perfect for you." Something about her tone annoyed David. She sounded too confident, too articulate. In his experience, waitresses were supposed to be grateful for tips and eager to please. This one seemed almost educated. It bothered him in a way he couldn't quite explain. His business partners arrived 15 minutes later. First came Robert Martinez, his chief financial officer, followed by Kevin Park, head of international relations, and finally Lisa Wong, his legal counsel. They were all successful, well-educated people who understood how the world worked. "David," Robert called out as he approached the table. "Ready for the big night?" "More than ready," David replied, finally putting away his phone. "These Japanese investors could triple our market share in Asia. We just need to show them we're serious players." Trinity returned with his scotch, setting it down carefully. "Gentlemen, ladies," she said, addressing the group. "Would you like to hear about our specials tonight?" "Just bring us the wine list," David said dismissively, "and make it quick. We have important business to discuss." As Trinity walked away, David leaned forward and lowered his voice. "You see what I mean about the service industry these days? They hire anyone. No standards anymore." Lisa frowned. "David, she seemed perfectly professional to me." "Please," David scoffed. "Look at her. I bet she barely finished high school. Probably has 3 kids and lives in some rundown apartment. These people don't understand what real work looks like." Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Maybe we should focus on the presentation for tonight." But David was just getting started. He had strong opinions about what was wrong with America, and he wasn't shy about sharing them. The problem is we've made it too easy for people to coast through life. They take these minimum wage jobs and expect to be treated like they're contributing something meaningful to society. Trinity returned with the wine list, and David could swear he saw a flash of something in her eyes. Anger, disappointment? He didn't care. People like her needed to know their place. "Here's your wine list, sir," she said calmly. "Take your time deciding. I'll check back in a few minutes." As she walked away again, David continued his commentary. "I bet she doesn't even speak proper English at home. Probably comes from one of those families where education isn't valued." It's sad, really. Robert was starting to look embarrassed. David, maybe we should keep our voices down. Why? I'm not saying anything that isn't true. Look around this restaurant. Everyone here except the staff went to good colleges, worked hard, and earned their success. That's how the world works. Merit matters. What David didn't realize was that Trinity could hear every word he was saying. The acoustics in Romano's were designed to carry sound, and his voice was louder than he thought. She had been walking past their table when he made his comments about education and English. Trinity had heard this kind of talk before. Working in the service industry, she'd encountered plenty of customers who looked down on her because of her job. But something about this man's arrogance was particularly infuriating. He spoke with such certainty about things he knew nothing about. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of what her mother always said. Let your actions speak louder than their ignorance. Trinity had learned long ago that the best response to prejudice was patience and professionalism. But that didn't make it any easier to swallow. When she returned to take their wine order, David was in the middle of explaining his business philosophy to his colleagues. Success is about making smart decisions and surrounding yourself with quality people, he was saying. You can't build a great company with mediocre talent. Have you decided on the wine? Trinity asked politely. David looked at her like she had interrupted something important. Yeah, we'll take a bottle of the 2018 Bordeaux. And bring it fast. Our investors will be here soon, and I don't want them thinking we can't even get decent service. As Trinity wrote down the order, she noticed David watching her with a smirk on his face. There was something cruel in his expression, like he was enjoying making her uncomfortable. Tell me, he said suddenly, how long have you been working here? The question caught Trinity off guard. About 6 months, sir. And before that? Let me guess, retail? Fast food? Trinity felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. I've worked in various positions while pursuing my education. David laughed, a harsh sound that made the other people at the table wince. Education? What kind of education? I graduated from Northwestern University last year. The table went quiet. David's expression changed from amusement to confusion, to something that looked almost like anger. Northwestern was one of the top universities in the country. It was where he had gotten his MBA. What did you study? Lisa asked, genuinely curious. International Business and Linguistics, Trinity replied. I speak 7 languages and wrote my thesis on cross-cultural communication in global markets. David's face was turning red. This wasn't how the conversation was supposed to go. In his world, waitresses didn't have degrees from prestigious universities. They certainly didn't speak multiple languages or write academic papers. Then what are you doing here? He demanded, his voice louder than before. Trinity met his gaze directly. Looking for the right opportunity in my field while paying my bills. Not everyone has the luxury of family connections or inherited wealth to start their career. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Everyone at the table knew that David's father had given him his first job and the seed money for his company. Trinity hadn't said it directly, but the message was clear. David felt something he rarely experienced: embarrassment. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his attack. After all, he was David Chen, CEO of a billion-dollar company. He wasn't going to be made to feel small by some waitress, no matter what degree she claimed to have. Well, he said with a forced laugh, if you're so smart, maybe you should be giving us business advice instead of taking our drink orders. Trinity smiled, but there was steel in her eyes. I'll get that wine for you right away, sir. As she walked away, David turned back to his colleagues, but their expressions had changed. The easy camaraderie from earlier was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that would only get worse as the evening progressed. Trinity returned with the wine, her hand steady as she presented the bottle to David. The label read 2018 Chateau Margaux, one of the most expensive wines on Romano's menu. She had chosen it deliberately, knowing he would approve of the price tag more than the taste. Would you like to try it, sir? She asked, following proper wine service protocol. David barely glanced at her as he swirled the wine in his glass and took a quick sip. Fine, leave the bottle. As Trinity poured wine for the rest of the table, she could feel the tension that had settled over the group. Robert kept checking his watch. Kevin was nervously adjusting his tie, and Lisa was studying the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. Only David seemed oblivious to the uncomfortable atmosphere he had created. So, David continued, picking up where he had left off, The Japanese market is all about respect and tradition. These investors will be impressed by our company's track record and our understanding of their culture. Trinity finished pouring and started to step back, but David's next words made her freeze. I've been studying Japanese business practices for months, he announced proudly to his colleagues. I even learned some key phrases. Listen to this. He cleared his throat dramatically and said, Watashi wa anata no bijinesu ni kyomi ga arimasu. Trinity's eyes widened. David had just told the table in broken Japanese that he was interested in their business, but he had used the wrong form of respect in the wrong context. It sounded more like something a tourist might say to a shop owner than a serious business phrase. Robert nodded approvingly, even though he clearly didn't understand what David had said. That's impressive, David. The investors will appreciate the effort. Oh, that's nothing, David continued, warming to his topic. I also know some Mandarin from my business trips to China. Watch this. He turned slightly in his chair and said, Women de gongs hien chengong, Naiman yingai tuzi. This time, Trinity couldn't help herself. She winced visibly. David had just said, Our company very successful. You should invest in the kind of broken Mandarin that would make native speakers cringe. The grammar was wrong, the tone was off, and the whole phrase sounded like something from a bad translation app. Excuse me, sir, Trinity said quietly, stepping forward. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think there might be a small issue with that translation. David's head snapped toward her, his eyes flashing with anger. What did you say? The phrase you just used in Mandarin, Trinity explained carefully. It might not convey the professional impression you're hoping for. The grammar structure is, Are you serious right now? David's voice rose loud enough that nearby tables started to turn and look. You're going to correct my Chinese? Trinity felt every eye in the restaurant turning toward their table. The soft piano music seemed to get quieter, and even the busy servers paused to watch what was happening. I was just trying to help, Trinity said, maintaining her professional tone despite the growing audience. In business contexts, you might want to use a more formal structure. Help? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. Let me get this straight. You think you can help me? Someone who has done business in Asia for over 15 years, with language and cultural issues? Kevin tried to intervene. David, maybe we should— No, I want to hear this, David interrupted, standing up from his chair. He was now towering over Trinity, his face red with embarrassment and fury. Please enlighten us. What exactly is wrong with my Chinese? Trinity glanced around the restaurant. Every conversation had stopped. Servers stood frozen with trays in their hands. Even the kitchen staff had poked their heads out to see what was happening. Her heart was pounding, but she had gone too far to back down now. The phrase you used translates roughly to, Our company very successful. You should invest. But in a business context, you would want to say something more like Women gongs de yeji fei chang chuse, chuang nin kaolu hezwajui. The words flowed from her mouth with perfect pronunciation and natural inflection. Several nearby diners who spoke Mandarin nodded in recognition of the proper phrasing. David's face went from red to purple. That's what I said. Not exactly, sir. What you said was grammatically incorrect and might be considered disrespectful in a formal business setting. The restaurant was now completely silent except for the soft background music. Even the hostess had stopped seating new customers to watch the confrontation. Disrespectful? David's voice cracked slightly. You think I don't know how to speak to international clients? I've closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm sure you have, Trinity replied calmly. I was only trying to point out that the specific phrase you used might not achieve the professional tone you're going for. David looked around the restaurant and realized that dozens of people were watching him argue with a waitress. His business partners were sinking lower in their chairs, clearly mortified. This was not the image he wanted to project 15 minutes before his crucial meeting with Japanese investors. But instead of backing down, David's pride pushed him forward. He had built his entire identity around being smarter and better than everyone else. He couldn't let some waitress, no matter what college she claimed to have attended, make him look foolish. You know what? He said, his voice carrying across the entire restaurant. If you're so smart, if you're such an expert on international business, then prove it. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his translation app, looking for something that would stump her. His fingers moved quickly across the screen until he found what he was looking for. Translate this, he announced loudly, reading from his phone in what he thought was perfect Mandarin. Wo shuyao yige hao de shengyi huoban, dan shi wo buxiang hebandan zuoshengyi. Several Chinese diners in the restaurant gasped audibly. David had just said in fairly clear Mandarin, I need a good business partner, but I don't want to do business with idiots. But his pronunciation was so poor that what actually came out sounded more like, I need good business stupid, but I don't want idiots business make. Trinity stared at him for a moment, processing what he had just said. The phrase was obviously from a translation app, and David clearly had no idea what he had actually asked her to translate. Sir, she said carefully, are you sure you want me to translate that in front of all these people? Yes, David shouted, his voice echoing off the restaurant's high ceilings. If you're so educated, if you're such a genius, then translate it. Tell everyone what I just said. The Japanese investors chose that exact moment to walk into the restaurant. They had arrived 5 minutes early and were being led to David's table by the hostess when they heard him shouting in broken Mandarin. They stopped walking and stood frozen by the entrance, watching their potential business partner make a spectacle of himself. Trinity saw them arrive and recognized them immediately from their formal business attire and the way they carried themselves. She also noticed the horrified expressions on their faces as they took in the scene. The phrase you just asked me to translate, Trinity said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent restaurant, roughly means I need a good business partner, but I don't want to do business with idiots. Although I should mention that your pronunciation made it somewhat difficult to understand. The silence that followed was deafening. David's mouth fell open as he realized what he had just made her say in front of a restaurant full of people, including his business partners and the investors he was supposed to impress. One of the Japanese investors said something quietly to his colleague in Japanese. Trinity understood every word, but she didn't translate it. They were expressing serious concerns about David's judgment and professionalism. Robert finally found his voice. David, maybe we should sit down and— No, David snapped, his composure completely gone. I want to know who this woman really is. Northwestern University? 7 languages. Give me a break. Nobody goes from Northwestern to waiting tables unless they're lying about something. Trinity felt something shift inside her. She had tried to be helpful. She had tried to be professional. She had even tried to save him from embarrassing himself further. But David wasn't interested in being saved. He was interested in humiliating her in front of everyone. You want to know who I really am? She asked, her voice steady but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Yeah, I do. Because nobody with a real education would be working here. Trinity looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching her. She saw curiosity, sympathy, and anticipation. She saw the Japanese investors still standing by the entrance, clearly reconsidering their business dealings. She saw David's colleagues looking like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. And then she saw something else. She saw her reflection in the restaurant's mirrors, and she remembered something her linguistics professor had told her. Language is power. When someone tries to diminish you with words, you respond with words that elevate you. All right, Trinity said, setting down her serving tray and standing up straighter. Let me tell you exactly who I am. The restaurant held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Trinity took a deep breath and looked directly at David. The entire restaurant was watching, including the Japanese investors who remained frozen by the entrance. She knew that whatever happened next would change everything. You asked me to translate your Mandarin phrase, she began, her voice clear and confident. So let me do that properly. She turned slightly so that her voice would carry to the entire dining room, then spoke in flawless Mandarin, with perfect tones and pronunciation. Nin gang kai sho de huashi, wo su yao yige hao de shengyi huoban, tan shi wo buxiang he ben dan zuo shengyi. She hua de yisi shi ning shu yao hao de he zuo huoban, dan buxiang he yushun de ren he zuo. The Chinese diners in the restaurant began murmuring to each other in amazement. Her Mandarin wasn't just correct, it was elegant, sophisticated, the kind spoken by educated native speakers, but Trinity wasn't finished. She turned to address the Japanese investors directly, switching languages without missing a beat. Konnichiwa, Goryoshin no kata. Watakushi wa kono otoko no hatsugen o shinpai shite orimasu. Kare wa bijinesu no ba de wa fusawashiku nai kotoba o tsukatte imasu. The Japanese investors' eyes widened in shock. Trinity had just greeted them formally, and expressed concern about David's inappropriate language in a business setting. Her Japanese was polished, respectful, and showed deep understanding of business culture. David stood there with his mouth hanging open, unable to comprehend what was happening. He had expected to embarrass Trinity, but instead she was speaking languages he didn't even recognize, let alone understand. What are you doing?" he stammered. Trinity smiled and continued, this time switching to French, her voice musical and fluid. "Mesdames et messieurs, permettez-moi de vous expliquer ce qui s'est passé ce soir. Cet homme a essayé de m'humilier parce qu'il pensait que je n'étais qu'une simple serveuse sans éducation." Several French tourists at a nearby table gasped and began speaking excitedly to each other. They had understood every word, and they were clearly impressed by Trinity's sophisticated vocabulary and perfect Parisian accent. "Stop," David said weakly, but Trinity was already switching to Spanish, then Portuguese, each transition seamless and natural. "Lo que este señor no entendía," she said in Spanish, "es que su ignorancia dice más sobre él que sobre mí." Then, in portuguese, "Ele assumiu que por eu ser uma garçonete negra, eu não poderia ter educação ou inteligência." The restaurant was now buzzing with excitement. People were pulling out their phones to record what was happening. This wasn't just a workplace confrontation anymore. It was a demonstration of incredible linguistic ability. Trinity finally turned back to David, who looked like he was about to be sick. "You wanted to know who I really am? Let me tell you in English, since that seems to be the only language you're comfortable with." She straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "My name is Trinity Washington. I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University with a double major in international business and linguistics. I speak 7 languages fluently: English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Mandarin, Japanese, and Italian. I spent my junior year studying at the Sorbonne in Paris and my senior year doing research at Beijing University." David's face had gone from red to white. His business partners were staring at Trinity with a mixture of awe and embarrassment for their colleague. "I wrote my senior thesis on cross-cultural communication barriers in international business," Trinity continued. "The paper was published in the Journal of Global Business Studies and has been cited over 200 times by other researchers. I also completed internships at the United Nations and the World Trade Organization." Lisa, David's legal counsel, was frantically typing on her phone. Within seconds, she looked up with wide eyes. "She's telling the truth," she whispered to the table. "I just found her thesis online. And her LinkedIn profile. She's incredibly qualified, so you see." "Mr. Chen," Trinity said, using David's name for the first time, "when you made assumptions about my intelligence based on my current job, you revealed more about your own limitations than mine." The Japanese investors began walking toward the table, and Trinity greeted them with a perfect bow and formal introduction in Japanese. They responded enthusiastically, clearly delighted to meet someone who understood their language and culture. "Miss Washington," one of them said in accented English, "your Japanese is exceptional. Where did you study?" "Thank you," Trinity replied. "I spent a semester at Waseda University in Tokyo as part of my international studies program." David watched in horror as the investors, his investors, the people who were supposed to save his company, began having an animated conversation with his waitress. They were speaking in Japanese, but he could tell from their body language that they were impressed. "This is insane," David muttered, sinking back into his chair. This can't be happening. But it was happening, and it was getting worse by the minute. Other diners were approaching Trinity, eager to practice their own language skills with someone so obviously gifted. A German couple tested her German, flawless. An Italian businessman tried her Italian, perfect. And a group of Korean tourists discovered she even knew some Korean phrases. "How is this possible?" Robert asked quietly. "How does someone with her qualifications end up working as a waitress?" Trinity overheard the question and answered directly. "Because having a degree doesn't guarantee a job, especially when you're competing in a market where many positions require years of experience that recent graduates don't have. I've been applying for international business positions for 8 months. I've had 17 interviews, made it to final round 6 times, and been told I'm either overqualified or not quite the right fit every single time." She looked directly at David as she continued. What I've learned is that some people make assumptions about your abilities based on what you look like or where you're currently working. They don't take the time to learn who you really are or what you're capable of. Kevin, David's head of international relations, was staring at Trinity with obvious interest. What kind of positions have you been applying for? International business development, cross-cultural consulting, diplomatic services, multinational corporate relations, Trinity replied. Basically anything that would let me use my language skills and cultural knowledge to help companies succeed in global markets. We have an opening in international relations, Kevin said quickly, ignoring David's shocked expression. Would you be interested in hearing about it? Kevin, David snapped. What are you doing? Being smart, Kevin replied firmly. We've been looking for someone with exactly her qualifications for 6 months. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who speaks 7 languages and has actual academic credentials in international business? Trinity smiled. I'd be very interested in hearing about it. The Japanese investors who had been listening to this exchange suddenly looked very concerned. One of them approached David and spoke in careful English. Mr. Chen, we are reconsidering our business relationship. Your behavior tonight has been very concerning. Wait, David said desperately, standing up again. Let me explain. This is all a misunderstanding, is it? The investor replied. We watched you treat this educated, accomplished woman with disrespect because you made assumptions based on her appearance and job. How do you treat your employees? How do you treat your business partners when they don't look like you expect them to? Trinity watched as David's carefully planned evening collapsed around him. The investors who were supposed to save his company were walking away. His own employees were more interested in talking to her than supporting him, and everyone in the restaurant was recording his humiliation on their phones. Please, David called after the Japanese investors. Don't let this affect our business relationship. But they were already leaving, shaking their heads and speaking rapidly to each other in Japanese. Trinity understood every word they were saying. They were discussing David's lack of judgment, his poor character, and their serious doubts about doing business with someone who showed such disrespect for others. Mr. Chen, Trinity said quietly, approaching his table one last time. Would you like me to translate what they just said about you? David looked at her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Maybe somehow she could salvage this situation. They said, Trinity continued in a voice that carried across the now silent restaurant, that a man who shows such poor judgment about people cannot be trusted to make good decisions about business. They said your company's values are incompatible with theirs, and they will be looking for other partners. The final nail in the coffin came when Trinity added, they also said that if you had bothered to treat people with respect, you might have discovered that your waitress could have helped you communicate with them in their own language, in the culturally appropriate way that might have impressed them. David slumped back in his chair, finally understanding the full scope of what his prejudice had cost him. But Trinity wasn't finished with him yet. The restaurant had erupted into chaos after the Japanese investors left. People were whispering excitedly. Phones were recording everything. And David sat frozen in his chair like a man watching his entire life crumble in real time. Trinity had returned to her professional duties, clearing empty glasses from nearby tables. But everyone in the restaurant was still watching her with amazement. The story was already spreading through social media, with videos of her speaking multiple languages going viral in real time. Robert leaned over to David and whispered urgently, "We need to do damage control now," but David couldn't move. He was still processing what had just happened. The Japanese deal, worth over $500 million, was gone. Just like that. Because he couldn't keep his mouth shut about a waitress. Sir? Trinity appeared at their table again, her professional mask perfectly in place. Would you like me to bring the check, or were you planning to order dinner? The question was simple, but David could hear the steel underneath her polite tone. She knew exactly what kind of position she had put him in, and she wasn't done yet. We should probably go, Kevin said quietly. Actually, Trinity said, setting down her serving tray. Before you leave, there's something I think you should know. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found what she was looking for. Then she held it up so David could see the screen. Do you recognize this name? She asked. David squinted at the phone. The contact read Mom, Dr. Patricia Washington. The name seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. Dr. Patricia Washington, Trinity said clearly. She's the head of the Diversity and Inclusion Research Center at Northwestern University. She's also one of the leading experts on workplace discrimination and unconscious bias in corporate America. David's face went white. He knew that name. His company had actually hired Dr. Washington as a consultant 2 years ago when they were trying to improve their diversity numbers after a discrimination lawsuit. "That's my mother," Trinity said simply. The words hit David like a physical blow. He remembered Dr. Washington clearly now, a brilliant, intimidating woman who had spent 3 days at his company, interviewing employees and reviewing policies. She had written a scathing report about the company's systemic issues with inclusion and respect for employees from diverse backgrounds. "Your mother," David repeated weakly. "Dr. Patricia Washington, yes. She's written 4 books on workplace diversity and consults for Fortune 500 companies about creating inclusive environments. She's actually quoted in your own company's diversity training materials." Lisa looked like she was about to faint. "David, do you realize what this means?" Trinity continued, her voice calm but relentless. "My mother has been studying workplace discrimination for over 20 years. She's an expert witness in employment lawsuits. She's testified before Congress about workplace bias, and tonight her daughter was publicly humiliated by the CEO of a company that claims to value diversity and inclusion." The full implications were starting to sink in for everyone at the table. David's company had a history of discrimination issues. They had spent millions on diversity consultants and training programs. And now the CEO had been caught on camera treating a highly qualified black woman with contempt because of his own prejudices. "But that's not all," Trinity said, scrolling through her phone again. "You want to know who else I know?" She showed them another contact. "Uncle James, federal judge. My uncle, James Washington, is a federal judge in the Northern District of Illinois. He specializes in employment law and civil rights cases." Robert was frantically calculating the potential legal exposure in his head. A federal judge's niece publicly humiliated by a CEO with a history of discrimination issues, with everything caught on video. "And this," Trinity continued, showing another contact, "is my godfather, Michael Torres. He's the employment attorney who handled the class action lawsuit against your company 2 years ago. The one that cost you $12 million in settlements." David felt like the walls were closing in on him. Every person Trinity mentioned was another nail in his professional coffin. "My cousin Angela runs a public relations firm that specializes in crisis management for corporate scandals," Trinity went on. "My roommate from college is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. My thesis advisor is now the CEO of Global Communications International, one of your biggest competitors." She put her phone away and looked directly at David. "The point is, Mr. Chen, that you never know who people really are or who they're connected to. You made assumptions about me based on my appearance and my job, without taking 5 minutes to learn anything real about me." Kevin was staring at Trinity with something approaching awe. "You're incredibly overqualified for any entry-level position. Why haven't you found something in your field?" Trinity's expression softened slightly. "Because the job market is competitive, and because many hiring managers make the same assumptions your boss just made. They see a young black woman and assume I'm not as qualified as I appear on paper. I've had interviews where people seemed surprised that I could speak in complete sentences. That's illegal," Lisa said automatically. "It's also nearly impossible to prove," Trinity replied. "People don't usually say it out loud like Mr. Chen just did." David finally found his voice. "Look, I made a mistake. I was wrong about you. Can we forget this happened?" Trinity looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Forget? Mr. Chen, there are about 50 people in this restaurant who just witnessed you publicly humiliate someone based on racist assumptions. Half of them recorded it on their phones. The story is already spreading on social media." She was right. David could see people at other tables still filming and typing on their phones. The hashtag #TranslateTranslate. This was already trending on Twitter, along with Romano's drama and Doc CEO gets owned. "My behavior tonight," David said desperately. "It's not who I really am. I was stressed about the business meeting and I—" "No," Trinity interrupted firmly. "This is exactly who you are. Stress doesn't create character, it reveals it. You treated me with disrespect because you thought you could get away with it. You thought I was powerless and voiceless. You were wrong on both counts." The restaurant manager finally approached their table, clearly nervous about the situation. "Is everything all right here?" Some of our other guests are concerned about the disturbance. Everything's fine, Trinity said professionally. Mr. Chen and his colleagues were just leaving. Actually, Kevin said quickly, before we go, I'd like to give you my business card. We really do have an opening in international relations, and after tonight, I think you'd be perfect for it. Trinity took the card and studied it. Kevin Park, Head of International Relations at Tech Global Industries. Isn't that Mr. Chen's company? Yes, but David won't be involved in the hiring decision for this position. The international division operates independently. David stared at Kevin in disbelief. You're trying to hire her? After what just happened? Because of what just happened, Kevin corrected. We need people with her skills and qualifications. We also need people with integrity, which she's demonstrated and you haven't. Robert was still focused on damage control. Trinity, what would it take for you to keep this quiet? We could offer you a position, a generous salary. Are you trying to bribe me? Trinity asked, raising an eyebrow. No, I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Trinity considered this for a moment. There is no solution that works for everyone, because what happened here tonight can't be undone. Your boss revealed his true character in front of dozens of witnesses. The consequences of that are his to deal with, not mine to fix. She turned to Kevin. But I am interested in hearing about that job opportunity. You can reach me at the email on my resume, which I'll send you tomorrow. You don't understand, David said, his voice cracking with desperation. The Japanese deal was everything. Without it, the company might not survive. You've destroyed my life over a misunderstanding. Trinity looked at him with no sympathy at all. I didn't destroy anything, Mr. Chen. You did that yourself the moment you decided that treating people with respect was optional. The Japanese investors didn't leave because of what I said. They left because of what you said and how you acted. She picked up her serving tray and straightened her uniform. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other tables to serve. People who understand that being polite to service workers is a basic requirement of being a decent human being. As Trinity walked away, David's phone started buzzing with notifications. Text messages, emails, social media alerts. The story was spreading faster than he could have imagined. His company's stock price was already starting to drop in after-hours trading as news of the incident spread through business networks. His board of directors would be calling for an emergency meeting. His wife would be furious when she found out. His reputation, built over 20 years, was crumbling in real time, and it was all because he couldn't treat a waitress with basic human decency. But the worst part was still to come. As David sat in the ruins of his evening, he had no idea that Trinity's connections were even more extensive than she had revealed. And some of those connections were about to make his life much more complicated than he could possibly imagine. 3 hours after the disaster at Romano's, David was sitting in his downtown office watching his world collapse in real time. The videos of Trinity speaking multiple languages and his own humiliation had gone viral across every social media platform. And translate, this was the #1 trending topic worldwide. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. First, it was his wife demanding to know why their friends were sending her videos of him yelling at a waitress. Then it was board members, each call more furious than the last. The Japanese investors had already issued a public statement withdrawing from all potential business relationships with Tech Global Industries. David, we need to talk now. His assistant's voice came through the intercom, tight with stress. Not now, Jennifer. I'm dealing with a crisis. Sir, this is part of the crisis. Dr. Patricia Washington is here to see you. David's blood turned to ice. Trinity's mother, the diversity expert who had already identified problems at his company. She was here, and David knew it wasn't a social call. Dr. Washington walked into his office without waiting for permission. She was a tall, elegant woman in her 50s wearing a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of both success and authority. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were furious. Mr. Chen, she said, not bothering to sit down, I believe you've met my daughter. David tried to stand, then thought better of it. His legs felt too weak to support him. Dr. Washington, I can explain. No explanation necessary. I've seen the videos, all 12 of them from different angles, including the one where you asked my daughter to translate your request for good business partners who aren't idiots. She pulled out her tablet and showed him the screen. The video had over 2 million views and was still climbing. The comments were brutal, with people calling for boycotts of his company and demanding his resignation. Dr. Washington, I made a terrible mistake. I was wrong about Trinity, and I'm prepared to make this right. Are you? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. And how exactly do you plan to make right the fact that you publicly humiliated my daughter based on racist assumptions about her intelligence and worth? David opened his mouth to respond, but Dr. Washington held up a hand to stop him. Let me tell you what's been happening since you left the restaurant, she continued. The video of Trinity speaking 7 languages has been shared by linguistics professors around the world. Her thesis on cross-cultural communication is being downloaded thousands of times as people realize they just watched a real expert in action. She scrolled through her tablet. Northwestern University just posted about their pride in their alumna. The United Nations tweeted about the importance of multilingual professionals. And 3 major international corporations have already reached out to Trinity about job opportunities. David felt sick. While his reputation was being destroyed, Trinity's was being built up on a global scale. But that's not the interesting part, Dr. Washington continued. The interesting part is what happened to your company's stock price. It's down 18% in after-hours trading. Your investors are panicking. And your biggest competitor just announced they're actively recruiting Trinity for a senior position. She turned the tablet so David could see the Bloomberg article. Tech global CEO's restaurant meltdown cost company Japanese deal. Sends stock tumbling. Dr. Washington, please. Isn't there something we can do to fix this? We? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Chen, you seem to be under the impression that this is my problem to solve. It isn't. David's assistant knocked on the door. Sir, the board is demanding an emergency meeting in 30 minutes, and there are reporters in the lobby. Handle it, David called out weakly. Dr. Washington gathered her things. I came here to tell you in person that my daughter will not be accepting any job offers from your company, no matter how generous. She's already received better opportunities from organizations that value both her skills and her dignity. What opportunities? David asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Global Communications International offered her a position as director of cross-cultural relations with a starting salary of $180,000. The World Trade Organization wants her for their diplomatic training program, and the State Department is interested in her for their cultural attaché program. Each number hit David like a physical blow. Trinity was about to earn more in her first year than most of his senior employees. But the most interesting offer, Dr. Washington continued, came from your biggest competitor. They want her to head their new International Business Development Division. The salary is $220,000, plus stock options, plus they're paying for her to get an MBA from Wharton. David stared at her in shock. That's more than I pay my VPs. Yes, it is, because unlike you, they recognize talent when they see it. They also understand that treating people with respect isn't just morally right, it's good business. The irony wasn't lost on David. While he was losing millions because of his prejudice, Trinity was gaining opportunities because of her grace under pressure. There's one more thing, Dr. Washington said, pausing at the door. The video of tonight has already been turned into a case study that I'll be using in my corporate training seminars. Companies pay me $50,000 per day to teach their executives about unconscious bias and inclusive leadership. Your behavior tonight will be helping me train better leaders for years to come. After she left, David sat alone in his office, watching the news coverage of his downfall. CNN was running the story as an example of workplace discrimination. The BBC was focusing on Trinity's linguistic abilities. Social media was calling for his resignation. His phone buzzed with a text from his head of PR. Emergency board meeting moved up. They want your resignation letter ready. Stock down 24%. David pulled up the company's diversity training materials on his computer. The same materials that quoted Dr. Washington's research. For the first time, he actually read them instead of just signing off on them. The irony was overwhelming. His company had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for diversity training that could have prevented exactly what happened tonight, if only he had paid attention. Meanwhile, across town, Trinity was at home fielding job offers and interview requests. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since she left Romano's. LinkedIn showed 847 new connection requests. Her email inbox was flooded with opportunities. But the call that meant the most came from her mother. I'm proud of you, Dr. Washington said simply. You handled yourself with grace and intelligence under impossible circumstances. I kept thinking about what you always taught me, Trinity replied. That dignity isn't something other people can give you or take away. It's something you choose to maintain. And you maintained it beautifully, even when he was trying his best to strip it away. The next morning, Trinity woke up to find herself on the front page of 3 major newspapers. The headlines varied. Waitress speaks 7 languages, exposes CEO's prejudice. From server to sensation, the true story behind viral video, and how one woman's grace under pressure changed everything. She had interviews scheduled with 5 different companies, including one with Global Communications International, David's biggest competitor. They had moved her interview to the top of their priority list and were prepared to offer her a salary that would change her life. Meanwhile, David's resignation letter was already written. The board had given him a choice: resign quietly or be fired publicly. His wife was consulting divorce lawyers. His reputation in the business world was finished. But the most devastating blow came when Kevin called to tell him that Global Communications International had just landed the Japanese deal that David had lost. They had used Trinity as their cultural liaison for the negotiations, and her ability to communicate perfectly in Japanese had impressed the investors so much that they signed a contract worth $800 million. Trinity had not only landed her dream job, she had also helped her new company steal David's biggest opportunity. 6 months later, Trinity was featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of 30 under 30 rising stars in international business. The article detailed her rapid rise from waitress to corporate executive, but it also talked about the importance of treating all people with respect, regardless of their current circumstances. David, meanwhile, was working as a mid-level consultant for a small firm, making a fraction of his former salary. His story had become a cautionary tale in business schools about the real cost of prejudice and the importance of inclusive leadership. The restaurant where it all started, Romano's, had framed the news articles about Trinity and hung them near the entrance. They had also implemented a new policy. Any customer who treated staff disrespectfully would be asked to leave immediately. The sign by the door read, "We believe in treating all people with dignity and respect. Those who cannot do the same are not welcome here." Trinity often thought about that night and what it had taught her about the power of maintaining your dignity in the face of prejudice. She had learned that sometimes the best response to someone trying to diminish you is simply to be undeniably excellent. And David had learned, far too late, that assumptions based on prejudice don't just hurt other people. They can destroy your own life in ways you never imagined possible. The viral video that started it all was still being shared, but now it was used in diversity training programs around the world as an example of both the persistence of workplace discrimination and the power of responding to hatred with grace, intelligence, and unshakable self-worth. In the end, Trinity got everything she deserved: respect, opportunity, and success. And David got exactly what he had earned: the consequences of his choices and a hard lesson about the true cost of treating people as less than human. The story became a reminder that in a world where everyone has a camera and social media can make anything go viral in minutes, character isn't just about doing the right thing when people are watching. It's about being the kind of person who does the right thing because it's right, regardless of who's watching or what you think you can get away with.